This is Walking Between Shadows. I'm your host, Ben Elliott, and my wife,
Taryn Elliott.
Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. This episode begins now.
It has been said that dishonesty is a contagious disease and that we are presently having an epidemic. Our Lord realized the sin of thievery. He taught the parable of the Good Samaritan in the book of Luke chapter 10, wherein he said, a certain man fell among thieves.
This week we're bringing another case to everybody from Tennessee. And I don't know if people really realize this, but Walking Between Shadows kind of centers around cases from Tennessee because that's our home state, it's where we're from, and we're familiar with a lot of places there.
We are.
So this week we're going to talk about the preacher's wife.
Yes, very controversial. Very close to where we grew up, and we're going to get deep into it.
Yeah, so this is Selmer, Tennessee, kind of the southern part of West Tennessee.
That's right.
Yeah, it's almost on the Mississippi border.
Yeah, it's Selmer. And how do you feel about Selmer?
Well, Selmer's just one of those places that felt kind of sticky when I went there.
Moist.
Right, and it's not, I just didn't know the community, didn't know anything about it.
Right.
But I will say this, I remember a few years back they were having a parade there. And they let these drag cars drive through the parade, and one of them was trying to show out, like doing a burnout.
Yeah.
And his tires locked down, and he shot off into the crowd or something and killed one or two people. In fact,
I do remember that, but I didn't realize that was in Selmer.
yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, the reason I always remember it is at the time I was working for an industrial supply company, and one of the clients that I dealt with a lot, his little daughter, and I think she was maybe between 14 and 16 years old, was one of them that was killed.
Wow, that's horrifying.
Yeah, we actually went to her visitation because this client was a great client for us, and we did a lot of work with him. But yeah, that's how I remember Selmer.
Yeah. Well, this was in 2006 when this case took place, and it was very covered. Very well covered in the media.
Yeah.
Oprah did a piece on this, and all kinds of, Snapped, you name it. But I wanted to go a little bit deeper into Matthew and Mary's backgrounds, just to kind of show what kind of life they lived, and maybe what led to this.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be interesting.
Now, so this involves, a couple. He was a preacher at a local Church of Christ.
Right.
Right.
Yes, okay. He was a preacher, and he was pretty young. 31 years old, and running this Church of Christ there in Selmer, and had 3 children, 3 daughters, and was married to.
So was he 31 when she killed him?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So.
Yeah, gosh.
Yeah, it's very, there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it, so.
Yeah. So with this in mind, people have to kind of understand the background a little bit. So why don't you tell us about the background?
All right, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So Matthew was born in Fort Worth, Texas in 1974 to Diane and Dan Winkler. He came from a long line of preachers for the Church of Christ and leaders for them. His great-grandfather, Wendell Winkler, wrote a book called The Role of a Preacher's Wife, which I haven't read that, but I did read some points in it, about what that requires you to do when you are a preacher's wife. So I read a little bit about that. Matthew's grandfather also played a huge role in the movement of the Church of Christ. Church of Christ, now let's talk a little bit about what they believe in their church. So they believe that they are reenacting the First Testament, right? Is that about right? Yes, they believe that they're reenacting and trying to do everything just by
follow the original rules.
The New Testament. I'm sorry, not the New Testament.
Gotcha. Okay.
See, I know nothing about the Bible. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's what they're trying to reenact, and that no other denomination, including Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, is worthy, and they're unholy, and they will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. And this is their beliefs.
Yeah.
They also believe that there is no music.
Yeah, see, that's what I remember the most. When I was a little kid, one of our babysitters used to take us to a Church of Christ.
Okay.
And they never had a piano or organ or any kind of musical instrument. Whereas, I grew up in the Presbyterian church, and we always had piano and organ and music. But it was really weird to me. Like, I kept asking, why are they not, where's the piano?
Yeah, it was very weird to me. I had a couple friends that were in the Church of Christ, and
You don't really remember them having music at their wedding or anything.
no, I do not.
Yeah.
But I don't remember really thinking that much about it as a kid, because I grew up in the Methodist, so somewhat. I mean, not a huge Christian. I didn't grow, I'm from Pennsylvania, so it's a different kind of, I grew up a little bit different than most people in the South, I think.
Well, I mean,
You
in
know.
y'all's household, y'all just didn't make church a priority. Y'all didn't go to church every Sunday.
No, we
and
didn't.
neither did we. We didn't either.
Right, so,
So I can say, maybe we grew up with an association with those churches and not
Right.
necessarily.
a lax kind of learning of what
Right.
those churches represented, and I still couldn't tell you everything about the Methodist Church whatsoever.
Right.
But this is what they believe, and so Matthew's Matthew's grandfather also wanted to abolish all other religions too. Now this started in Texas, and now there's hundreds of Church of Christ all over. Mainly in Tennessee. And West Tennessee is huge, like from Nashville on over. But Tennessee, Texas, and there's a couple in Louisiana, but mainly that Bible Belt. You're looking at that Bible Belt.
Yeah, one of my best friends is Church of Christ, and he moved to Nashville several years ago, and one of the things he told me was that the church that he and his wife attend regularly, and it's not as orthodox, I guess you could say. They're a little more progressive,
Right.
and they still don't have musical instruments or whatever. I mean, they still abide by the rules of the Church of Christ, but he says that it's a little more progressive in a
Right.
bigger area.
And some of them are stricter than others. I
Sure.
mean,
It's just like any of them,
Right.
really.
but the role is that women are to be quiet, and they come second to men. And so that even plays part in some of the churches still. Women can be no leaders in the church. I mean, even some of them not allowed to teach, they're not allowed to teach in the nursery school or be in the nursery. So I'm thinking, who's in the nursery? Then a bunch of men?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I have no idea.
Y'all tell me. If anybody, I'm not talking bad about it. I just don't know much about it. And this
Right,
is
and
what
we're
I
not
read.
here to bash. We're here to, talk about the differences.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. So one of the key differences is I always felt unaccepted around the Church of Christ.
Yes.
And yet when anybody from the Church of Christ came to the Presbyterian Church, it was welcomed with open arms, and we're all here to worship and be equals and love, and I just really didn't feel that. And I would say my experience there was more when I was little. I mean, before I was 6 years old, even at a Church of Christ out in the country.
Right.
And yeah, boy, they were strict.
You weren't one of them.
Oh.
So you had to go.
Yeah, either
that.
join or go.
And what do you have to do to join that? I mean, is that being baptized into
Well, I'm sure that's part of it,
or
but
saved? I don't
yeah,
know.
I'm sure all that's part of it, and then they have their own core teachings that go along with, accepting Christ and being a part of the Church of Christ. So
Well, there's definitely stricter rules on women. That's
Seems
for sure.
so, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
and like I said, they're to be quiet. They're not to be heard. No leaders. So Matthew's father, Dan, was also a preacher, and his mom was a school teacher. Diane was a school teacher. The family moved a lot, and until I started researching this, I did not realize how much preachers and their families have to move around. I mean, the kids, there's a lot of moving. There's a lot of moving, going to different churches and doing different things. So, they might take over a preaching position or, in one church and then be there for 2 or 3 years and then move on to a totally different state even.
Really?
So, yeah, so that's kind of how Matthew, he was raised. He had 2 brothers, one older and one younger than him. In high school, Matthew played football for Austin High School football team, and he was pretty good. They said he was pretty good, very popular, good-looking man.
Well, he was a big, well-built guy. I mean, he wasn't a little
Athletically
skinny.
built,
Yeah.
good-looking, great smile, and was popular in school, but had a lot of friends, but really never had a girlfriend or a serious girlfriend. And when he graduated in 1993, it was no surprise that he was going to join the ministry and that he'd been called into that. Family, that was bred into him pretty much his
Yeah.
whole life. So he went to school in Freed-Hardeman in Henderson, Tennessee. And we've had a couple people that we graduated with that went to school with Mary and Matthew. So Matthew, he joins Freed-Hardeman, and he is going to in for biblical studies, and he joins a whole bunch of groups and stuff, and he ends up meeting Mary there. And they get pretty, they're dating pretty seriously. And I mean, 3 months after dating, Mary calls her parents in Knoxville, Tennessee, and says, I got somebody I want you to meet.
Yeah.
So her and Matthew go up to Freed-Hardeman, and not to Freed-Hardeman, but to Knoxville to see her parents, and he asks Mary's father for her hand in marriage. 6 months later, they're married. So now let's talk about Mary a little bit. Mary was born in 1973 in Knox County, Tennessee, and she was born to Clark and Mary Freeman. And that's kind of confusing because her mother's name's Mary, her name's Mary, but
Yeah.
that's how it went. She was, her family attended the Laurel Church of Christ, and her father was a deacon there. Their family lived by the strict guidelines of the church. I mean, what their father said, Clark, whatever he said went. He made all the decisions. He made all the money.
Yeah.
His word was gospel in the home. When Mary was 2 years old, her mother gave birth to her little sister, Patricia. And when Patricia was born, she had spina bifida. And also, she developed spinal meningitis and encephalitis when she was an infant.
Oh, gosh.
Right. So very, very dangerous diseases that she had. And it caused her to be very physically and mentally disabled. But Mary was very protective and very close to Patricia. Even though she had her own bedroom growing up, she would still go into Patricia's room at night and sleep in the bed with her. Patricia had metal braces on her legs, and Mary would have to put 2 pillows in between them, so because she jerked around, from the
Yeah.
injuries and her body sustained, and she would put those pillows there to cushion the kicks, which is pretty sweet. I mean, that's not many kids are that nice. I mean, so she learned nurturing and compassion very young. So Mary's parents also fostered kids when she was in middle school, and at least one I know. Then in 1987, one day Mary's mother was giving Patricia, 11-year-old Patricia, a bath, and Patricia passed away with a heart attack.
Oh, gosh.
And that really traumatized Mary. I mean, very much. So Mary goes to school seeking help through the guidance counselor, how to cope with this grief and deal with this every day. And when Clark finds out about this, he calls up to the school and says, you've got to stop.
Right.
This is to be handled in the home, with the family, and in the church. So she wasn't even able to seek any kind of help for her grief. And
Right.
that's a lot for a 13-year-old girl to have to take on. But soon after that, Clark and Mary Freeman adopt 5 foster children. And that's a lot. I mean, that they adopt these kids. Not only do they foster them, they adopted these children and took them into the home as their own. And Mary did very well with them. She was very helpful and compassionate to these kids, and they looked up to her very much. And I have to say that is a whole lot for Mary's parents to take on. I mean,
Yeah, I couldn't imagine in the middle of my upbringing other kids coming into my house.
no, or going through my grief. Or
Yeah.
going through my grief of losing, a child or a sibling and able to take in and nurture 5 abused children.
Yeah.
And they were all siblings, so they came from one home. So that was going on. And in high school, Mary was very active in choir and tennis, and she also was a tutor to the disabled children. So she was also in a couple groups, one called Young Life. It was like a religious group in high school, and they did things for the community, and the students, disabled students and things. So she really did a lot. She did a lot. Everyone described Mary as studious and quiet and empathetic, but she did like to joke around, and she liked to laugh and smile. She had a good time. Never had a serious boyfriend either.
Yeah.
So when she graduated from high school, she decided to go to David Lipscomb University, which is affiliated with the Church of Christ as well. And she went there for 2 years and decided to transfer to Freed-Hardeman.
And Lipscomb's in Nashville.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so she decided to transfer to Henderson, Tennessee, and go to Freed-Hardeman and finish up her last 2 years in special education major. And that's how she met Matthew. She got down there and joined 5 or 6 groups at Freed-Hardeman, and he was in one of them. And they met, and history.
Sparks flew, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so after they got married in 1996, Mary and Matthew both dropped out of Freed-Hardeman, and they went back to Knoxville at this time, and Matthew started working for Mary's dad. They needed to save money. I believe at that time Mary was pregnant with her first child too. So this is when Matthew started kind of acting irrational, short-tempered, yelling at Mary a lot, and, verbally kind of assaulting her at times. Mary thinks it was because he was kind of resentful that they had to drop out of school and he had to work for his father-in-law.
Well, do you know why they had to drop out of school?
Save money.
Do you think it was because she got pregnant?
Possibly, I think so. I think they both had to drop out then because they needed money. I mean, they have a baby coming, and
So what did her dad do that Matthew went to work for him?
well, like he started flipping houses later on, but he owned a construction company. So
Gotcha.
Matthew was having to go up there and work,
So Matthew started feeling kind of trapped, like,
Yes.
yeah, I'm
yes.
trapped by this woman's family, and
That's when he started kind of lashing out too. So after that summer, Matthew and Mary go back to Henderson, Freed-Hardeman at the time, and Matthew finishes up his degree in biblical studies, and he graduates in '98. And after he graduates, he gets a job down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, as a youth minister. So Mary, they go down there, and she has the baby in '98 as well. She has Patricia, so they named their first daughter after her sister, Mary's sister that had passed away, and they go down to Baton Rouge after he graduates, and they're both very homesick because by that time Matthew's parents had moved to Tennessee, and Mary's parents were in Tennessee, and there they are with a baby. They're in a totally different state. They don't know anybody, and they're homesick as hell. They're ready to come home.
yeah.
So they
Now,
start.
what did he go down there to do, though? Was he like a youth minister, or what was his job down there?
He was a youth minister for a Church of Christ down there in
Oh,
Baton
okay,
Rouge.
okay.
So, yeah. And that's not really, he was working his way up. He wanted to be a minister. He wanted to be in the pulpit of the church. So he was working his way up. And in April of 1999, Mary becomes pregnant again. And while she's pregnant, she finds out that her mom is sick with cancer. And, Matthew and Mary are looking for jobs in Tennessee at this time, too. They're ready to move back to Tennessee. They've been looking since they got down there, pretty much. but now especially since her mother was sick, and now her mother passes away, and she's pregnant,
Yeah.
with her second child. So they end up getting moving back to Nashville, Tennessee, where Matthew is offered another youth minister job at a church there, and their second daughter, Allie, is born, and Mary has developed postpartum depression, which is awful. And on top of that, she's dealing with two babies, and they were close in age. I mean, like very close in age.
Yeah.
And she's got postpartum, and she's dealing with the grief of her mother's death, and she's got 5 foster siblings that are needing her emotional support as a mother almost now. At this point, they've already lost one family. Now they've lost their adopted mother. So that's a lot.
Yeah, they reached out to her in a time when she didn't have a lot to give back.
Right.
Yeah.
And Matthew was said to be very overbearing and kind of told them to screw off, that she had enough on her plate. And I don't know if he was just being protective of her at that time or if he was being mean, as they said he was. So he might have been mean to them. I don't really know how that worked.
Yep.
He was also feeling a lot of pressure to take on that role that his grandfather and his father and his great-grandfather had, being a minister in a church of his own, and he wasn't doing that at the time. So, I mean, that's a lot to take on. But when he was doing this, Mary was very helpful. She was helping out a whole lot. She was doing things for the church as well. People get sick, and she made sure they had cards sent to them, and
Right.
she checked on the elderly, and she did things that took that role on as a preacher's wife. So she was doing these things. So Mary claimed that Matthew was never physically violent, just verbally, until they moved to McMinnville. So they moved to McMinnville, Tennessee, and they buy this $85,000 house, which then, that's a nice house, It's a pretty nice house. And they make friends with the neighbors, and everybody in the neighborhood really likes Mary and Matthew. The youth really looked up to Matthew. They called him Wink. They said he was a lot of fun. He started teaching for a Christian school there in McMinnville, and I mean, everything was going pretty good. But the secretary at that church said that Matthew was not as he seemed. He was overbearing, and he treated her like a child. She said that every time Mary would come into his office, it was tense. You could just feel like a tension,
Yeah.
So she didn't really know what that was about, but Mary would often bring lunch up to the church for Matthew, and she would sit there and eat with him. And there was a time when the secretary heard Matthew telling Mary, you need to not eat so much. You're getting large. Which is kind of, I mean, she had babies, she had 2 babies, and she's trying to,
Right.
please, come on. Anyway, so that was something else. So another church member, an elderly man at the McMinnville church, also said that he lost complete respect for Matthew when Mary came into the service one morning with a black eye. So he goes up to Mary, this elderly member of the church goes up to Mary and asks her what's going on with her eye. And she says, well, me and the girls were goofing off, and one of them elbowed me in my eye, And he said he wasn't really buying it, but Matthew comes walking up and says, hey, just doing this thing, and Mary puts her head down. She quits talking and puts her head down. So I don't know if that's,
Right.
When Matthew had taken this job at the McMinn Youth Ministry Church, or at the church for a youth minister, he was promised that he would be able to take over that role in the pulpit as the minister as soon as the one that was there then would step down. But in 2004, it was a no-go. They hired another preacher to take over that position, and Matthew was mad as hell.
Yeah.
Mad as hell. He really worked hard for that. He was prepared for that, and I think Matthew really felt the pressure of his family,
Yeah.
carrying that role like his dad and his granddad and his great-granddad and so on. So he soon took a position in Selmer, Tennessee at the 4th Street Church of Christ as the minister. So he finally got his church. He was super excited about this, and at that time, Mary found out she was pregnant again with her 3rd child. And they go in for their ultrasound and find out that they're having a little girl again. And Matthew was clearly not happy about that. Told a couple people, well, it's another girl.
Yeah.
You know,
And not realizing that was more on him than it was on her.
all on him.
Right.
I mean, she had nothing to do with that, but
Right.
of course, secondary.
All right.
It's secondary. Okay, so Mary had a lot on her shoulders at this time. She was, pregnant, and by the time they moved to Selmer, she was 8 months pregnant.
Oh, gosh.
Right. 2 little kids, 8 months pregnant, having to unpack a whole house. Her husband's getting started in the church, and I mean, you got to take on your role as that preacher's wife immediately. I mean, there's no time in between. Of course, I'm sure some of the church ladies came in and were like, "Hey, let me help you out a little bit," but
Yeah.
still, 8 months pregnant. So it looks like every single time that Mary was pregnant, she was having to move to a new place,
Yeah.
which is stressful enough.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
so we're looking now at 2004 and 2000, almost 2005, because in March of 2005, she has her 3rd daughter. And once they're in this neighborhood there in Selmer, Tennessee, the neighbors didn't like them so much. The one across the street had a couple kids, and they were outside one day with their Rottweiler. It's an old dog. It was 15 years old. Kids are sitting out there, and here comes Matthew, crossing the street over to the neighbors, and he says, if this dog ever crosses my path, or gets in my yard, I'm gonna shoot it and kill it. Well, these are little kids, They
So
go,
he tells the kids this.
he didn't tell the parents. He tells the
Yeah.
little kids this.
Yeah.
So they go running in, and they're like, Mom, this guy is threatening to shoot the dog, And she's like, no, he's a preacher. He wouldn't do that. No way. So she waits a couple days. The kids are terrified. They're keeping the dog in the house. The dog's probably shitting and pissing all over the house at this point because
They won't let it out.
no, you know how kids are. I don't blame them. And so she goes over there. And when she gets over to the driveway, she pulls up one day, after they've been there for a couple days or weeks, whatever. And she says, what's going on about the dog? And he said, you got that right. If that dog ever steps foot in my yard, I'm going to kill it. Very short. She said Mary just kind of stepped back and put her head down and got by her girls, And I mean, so everything seemed like in their life was pretty compatible. Mary and Matthew, she says he was a little bit abusive here and there. But one of the main things that she and he were not compatible with was, and you wouldn't think so, they had 3 kids, was in the bedroom. So Matthew wanted to be a freak, and Mary did not.
Yeah.
So that was an issue during the whole entire marriage, that he wanted to be a freak and she didn't want to be a freak, but she always said that he would, he agreed that he would respect her, and if she asked not to do it, he would stop. And she always said that in the heat of the moment, he might take it too far, maybe slip it in the back door, something like that. And she would, but if she really said no and pushed him off, he would stop, which is, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, that's what she said.
It sounds like he read too much into the history of Sodom and Gomorrah.
I don't know much about that.
Well, I'm just saying, he wanted to go there.
She didn't want to go there.
She didn't.
No. She was more traditional, and
But according to her testimony later in court, he would back off. He would not force her.
well, yeah, we'll talk about that because at the beginning of this, she said that he never forced her into anything. She would, he would stop. So, anyway, so everything in their life seemed to be pretty compatible. They were working together. That she finally got in his church. Yeah, you're going to have haters no matter where you go. You're going to have people that don't like you. But the majority of people really liked Matthew, and the kids that he ministered looked up to Matthew.
Yeah.
So, we'll look at it that way. December 1st of 2005, Mary deposited a $6,500 check into their region's checking account. And this was a fraudulent check. She had gotten involved in this Yahoo Nigerian boys scam thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when she deposited that check, we do not know for sure if she knew that it was a fraudulent check. Don't know that for sure. But, it was. It was a fraudulent check. And in January of 2006, Mary decides she's going to go back to school. So she enrolls back into Freed-Hardman, and she's going to finish up her special education major. And, she felt like she deserved that. She got a little extra money in the bank. She's going back to school. But as of February 2006, that check had not cleared through the bank yet.
Yeah.
And she goes in on February the 11th and changes her address on a new account. So she opens a new account at a different bank, and she puts it in a P.O. box. Okay, so it's already getting kind of sketchy,
Mm-hmm.
And she begins to kite checks like crazy.
Oh, Lord.
And she's putting in, explain a little bit what kiting checks is. Do you know exactly?
I don't know a whole lot about it. It seems like it's when you're, writing checks for a deposit into another bank and then drawing off cash or something like that, and before the check clears. That's why banks have rules about holding checks until they clear.
Right.
Before they're available to you as cash.
But now they don't really, now it's just directly deposited and directly taken out. But used to, there was a little time in between there, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, so that's kiting is taking advantage of that time that it took for the check to clear.
And putting in, so what she was doing is going to a Regions account and putting, put the check in, then she was going into the other account and putting money in there, and she was just bouncing them back and forth, trying to cover this check. So also at the end of February, she goes out to dinner with one of her friends and tells this friend that, hey, life has never been better.
Mm-hmm.
Never been better.
Mm-hmm.
I would never move out of West Tennessee. It's great here. We got so much support. We're doing well. In early March of 2006, Matthew also enrolled back into Freed-Hardman, and he was going to get his master's.
Mm-hmm.
And his dad was actually teaching there at the time. So Matthew's dad was teaching at Freed-Hardman at the time, and they happened to run into, Matthew and Mary happened to run into Matthew's dad, Dan Winkler, and Matthew's telling him, life is great. We're paying off everything. We almost got the minivan paid off. The house is great. We're getting caught up on bills, and I'm coming back and getting my master's. So his dad is super proud.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary's just sitting back here thinking, hell, I'm not going to say nothing, but
this is all about to fall apart, and you don't know it.
Let's go fly a kite, because that's what I've been doing for like crazy. And she was, but Matthew, is telling his dad something totally opposite, that they have money and they're paying off their things. And so, so soon after March the 13th of 2006, Mary receives another fraudulent check for $4,900, and she starts kiting again. So here we go again. Did you not know? That other one, at this point you have to know, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of have to know at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But, and the bank ends up calling Mary and saying, you've got to come in here. Regions Bank calls and says, you've got to come in here. You're kiting checks, and this is very illegal, and we can help you out. We can give Matthew a loan for $5,000 to cover this overdraft. She was overdrawn $5,000 at this time. And she says, I'm confused. Now, was she confused or did she not want to tell Matthew?
Yeah.
You know, they're telling her, you've got to come in here. And she acts like she don't know what the hell's going on. You know, like, what? Huh? So she goes on a couple more days, and on March the 21st of 2006, she is substitute teaching at Selmer Schools that day, and she's there all day, and she's on the phone the whole entire day with Banks, and she does 16 phone transfers that day. And they're calling her. You've got to come in. You've got to come in. She's feeling the pressure. You know. And on Wednesday, March the 22nd, the Winklers never showed up at church Wednesday night for service, which was strange because Matthew never called. Mary never called. What's going on? What's going on? They try to call the house. Nobody's answering the phone, so a couple of the elderlies go to the house. And they knock on the door, nobody's answering, TV's on, phone's ringing, but nobody's answering the door, minivan's gone. They search around, they find some keys, and they get in the house, and no one else is in the house. They get back to the bedroom, and they find Matthew, and he is on his back, dry blood, kind of crusted, foamed around his mouth and nose, and Mary and the girls are nowhere to be found. They call 911. So police arrive, and they're searching everywhere. 31-year-old Matthew Winkler was dead. Matthew had been shot with a 12-gauge shotgun at point-blank range, apparently while he was sleeping. The plug to the phone nearby Matthew had been pulled from the wall, and it was obvious to authorities that Matthew was left there to die with no ability to reach the phone. So there were no.
I'm sorry. He was left there in that state. I mean, he didn't die instantly from the gunshot wound.
No, he did not.
Oh, and so being that the phone was unplugged, it looked pretty obvious that somebody did that on purpose.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right. So officers didn't know at this time if Mary was the perpetrator or if she was the victim.
Yeah.
They had no idea. All the church members are saying there's no way Mary could have done this. She had to have been kidnapped. There's no way. TBI comes in. They put out an Amber Alert. The van's missing. There was kids involved, so they put an Amber Alert out for the van, and that's going on. They searched the house. No signs of forced entry. The gun was gone. The only room that looked like there was any evidence or any foul play was where Matthew was found in the bedroom. TBI confiscated some computers and paperwork and things like that from the home. They did find soon after that what was going on with the bank and with Mary kiting these checks, and they were able to put a track on Mary's cell phone, and they traced her down to Orange Beach, Alabama, which is about 400 miles away. So around 7 p.m. that night in Orange Beach, some undercover officers came up on Mary in a Piggly Wiggly parking lot, and they ordered her out of the car. The babies are screaming in the back seat, you know, they're scared.
Yeah.
They're scared. Mary showed no emotion and gave them no hard time. Just got in the car. Officers said that Mary fell asleep in the back seat while she was being transferred to the local police station to be questioned. So she was exhausted.
Yeah, that tells me she's exhausted and actually relieved.
Relieved. They said she seemed somewhat relieved. So the girls told officers that someone had hurt their daddy, broke in and hurt their daddy, and their mom, he was in the hospital. That's what they've said. And that their mom had to take the gun with them to protect them from the bad person. They did this to their dad. When officers found the 12-gauge shotgun in the van, they were very suspicious at this time of Mary. So during the first interview with police, Mary never asked about Matthew either. She never asked how he was doing or showed any emotion. She just didn't, she wasn't showing any signs of distress whatsoever. Officer said Mary seemed exhausted and somewhat relieved, like we said. Patricia, the Winkler's oldest, told officers that she heard a loud noise and went to look in her parents' room. She thought her daddy had hit into the nightstand and fell on the floor. So she said that he was lying on his face, and when she peeked in the door, he was lying on his face, and she saw her mom walking around, and then her dad said, "Call 911," and Mary shut the door to the bedroom. Mary told FBI that she drove 200 miles to Mississippi after she shot Matthew, where her and her girls stayed in a hotel, and the girls swam in the pool. The next day, Mary drove another 200 miles to Orange Beach, where she was apprehended at that time. She said this was the last time with her daughters, so she was taking them to have some fun. Before they had bad days, she wanted to give them happy days. And that's kind of, I don't know. To me, that's kind of sad. It just kind of, she loved those girls. I mean, she loves the girls. You could tell that. Dan and Diane Winkler flew down to Alabama to get the girls and learned of Mary's involvement in this. And they asked to speak with Mary, and she agreed. And they went back and told her they loved her. And they took the minivan back with the girls and had custody of them for a little while. When Mary was back in Selmer, Tennessee, she gave a written confession. And her confession, like I said, was written, and this is pretty much what she said. He had a shotgun. He kept it in a case. I don't remember going to the closet or getting the gun. The next thing I remember hearing was a loud boom. I thought it wasn't as loud as I thought it would be. I heard the boom, and he rolled out of the bed onto the floor. I saw some blood on the floor and some bleeding from his mouth. I went and wiped his mouth with a sheet. I told him I was sorry and that I loved him, and then I ran. I remember holding the shotgun and hearing the boom, then the smell. He asked me why, and I just said I was sorry. I was scared and sad and wanted to get out of the house. I was upset because he'd been on me lately, criticizing me for things, the way I walk, the way I talk, what I eat, everything. It was just building up to this point, and I just snapped. So the Winkler girls had some problems after this, too. They would not leave their grandparents' sight. I mean, they had to all stay together, and they wouldn't go to bed without, lights on in their room. They were scared.
Yeah.
These babies were scared. Mary was charged with first-degree murder, and she was put into jail. And after 5 months, her dad posted bond. He remortgaged his house, and he posted her bond, and she gets out of jail. Mary stayed with a friend in McMinnville, Tennessee, and took a job at a dry cleaner's at this time while she was out on bail. About a year later, the trial began, and the facts were all there. Everything was all there, but the motive really wasn't. Still really don't know why she did this. What was going on? But the phone being unplugged gave prosecution premeditation. Mary shot him and unplugged the phone so Matthew couldn't call 911. Patricia, the Winkler's oldest, actually testified for the prosecution, and when she was asked how her dad was, she said he was a good father and that he was never mean to her mother. So that was a big thing. She said her and Allie were awakened by a loud boom that morning, and she went to see what was going on. She saw her dad on the floor with blood on his mouth, and her mom walking around the room. He asked her to call 911, and then her mom shut the bedroom door so she couldn't see him anymore. Diane Winkler stated that Mary's one visit with her daughters, she claimed that she did not kill their dad. And the girls and Diane Winkler were very upset with Mary for not telling the truth. You're continuing to lie. Just tell the truth at this point. We know. No sense in lying. The shotgun found in Mary's van was determined to be the murder weapon, so that was another thing against Mary. Mary had been caught up in this check cashing scam, according to the prosecution, and she didn't want to tell Matthew about it, so she was covering herself. She shot him. She didn't
Yeah.
want him to know.
Yeah.
In the trial, it came out that Mary had 5 different bank accounts. Not just the 2, but she had 5. Prosecution argued she'd placed a fraudulent check into one account, draw cash from it, and then turn around and put it in another. And they were all worthless checks. They were all fraudulent checks. It's called check kiting, and it's very illegal. Regions Bank had contacted Mary and tried to give her every opportunity to fix this, but, she never did.
Yeah.
She never would. She never would tell Matthew. So there was a lot against her, during this trial. 2 days before Matthew's murder, Mary had made the 16 transfers over the phone, and there was witnesses to that while she was in school substituting that day. Teachers saw her on the phone all day long. So there was witnesses against that. So here comes to the defense team, and they say that that Matthew was not as he seemed.
Right.
Matthew was a jerk. He abused her financially, sexually,
Emotionally. Yeah.
physically, all of it, the works. And they also claimed that Matthew was he was the head of the household. This is the church believes. He was a preacher. So he was the one that opened up all these 5 bank accounts that were opened up.
Well,
Mary.
That's where I struggle with this whole thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think he directly opened all those accounts. No. I think he pushed her to. But I don't think he didn't know. He was in the same struggle she was. Mm-hmm. They needed money. They're starting off at a new place yet again. This is the 5th start.
Yeah.
And now they have, 3 kids, basically.
And also, another thing with Mary and Matthew was that when she had her 3rd daughter, and they were just moving to Selmer and starting this, life there, the baby had some issues when she was born.
Yeah.
So medical bills just piled up on them.
Well, and then she suffered from postpartum, too, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So, you've been through postpartum.
Well, she suffered with postpartum after she had her 2nd daughter. Not her 3rd, but there's a very...
But still, she's scared it's going to happen again. And that's not easy for a woman to go through.
Not at all. No, not at all. Mary had a lot on her.
Mm-hmm.
You think about everything Mary had on her when she...
That's what I'm talking about. She felt the pressure as, Matthew's wife mm-hmm. and the mother of those kids. She felt the pressure to do what she had to do. Right? When times get desperate, people do what they have to do.
Right.
And this was what she did.
I think so, too.
And I don't think she did it without his knowledge.
Right. Another thing the defense brought up was that Mary and Matthew often unplugged their phones to let their baby play with the phone, which is something I did, too.
Yeah.
I did it, too.
Yeah.
Because at that time, they dial 911, and here comes the police, and we don't need all that extra.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying the defense used that. Mm-hmm. She had a badass defense team out of Mississippi, mm-hmm. and they took this pro bono. So, the publicity of it all, they took it on. Mm-hmm. They knew they were going to get some cases right. and some business through this, right. So they took this on. They also put a wig and a pair of high heels up on the stand, and they claimed that, here goes Mary's head down, So, that was a big thing. The morning of the murder, Mary claims that they were woke up by the baby crying, and Matthew physically kicked her out of the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And they both get up. They go to the baby's room, and she follows Matthew into the baby's nursery, and he's putting his hand over the baby's mouth and nose to stop her breathing so she'll fall back asleep, mm-hmm. which is something he did to Allie, mm-hmm. too, Mary claims, after she was born, to make her stop crying and to make her go to sleep. She'd pass out.
Yeah.
So Mary says that she takes the baby from him, and he goes back to bed, and she gets the baby back to sleep. She goes back into the bedroom, and she doesn't remember getting the gun, mm-hmm. but she gets it, and he's sitting on the bed, is what she said, and he asks her why, and she just hears the boom.
Yeah.
And runs.
Yeah.
So that's basically the whole, that was the whole testimony of the defense, was that she was a battered wife, that suffered from PTSD from the death of her sister. Then she was unable to get any counsel, and that played a part in it too. They said that PTSD played a part in it, that she was untreated for that, in her life and all the trauma that she'd been through in that marriage.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what they went with. So Mary was sentenced to. She was found guilty of
Voluntary manslaughter.
voluntary manslaughter, and the judge ordered her to 210 days in jail, and with time already served. So she had already done those 5 months before her dad bonded her out, and now she only had to do 60 days in a mental facility, and then she was done. 2 men on the jury, so the jury was made up of 10 women and 2 men. And one of the jurors after the trial stated that the reason why she got off so lightly was because the majority were women on the jury. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Well, I mean, her attorneys, Steve and Tony Farice, they had a really good day when they were picking the jury for that trial.
oh yeah, they hit the jackpot with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I mean, they really, look, they did it. They did the thing.
Right, and I see she had Leslie Ballin with her too, so, I mean,
Right. Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
It's the trifecta of some of the best attorneys in the Memphis area.
Yes. And so she did her 210 days, time served, and she did 60 more days in a mental facility. She gets out, and in 2008, Mary is given back full custody of those girls. And so there's some side notes about Mary. And first, I want to ask you, what do you think? What do you think about this whole? Do you think that she did this because she was a battered wife, or do you think that she did this to cover her ass for these checks?
No, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
I think Mary was a child of the church and the way of life that her mom and dad set forth, but she never really wanted to be. And, I think her and Matthew wound up together because it was the path of least resistance for Mary to get married and find stability in her life and have kids and the American dream or whatever you want to say. But I think there was a little bit of Mary that never really wanted that. I think she fought that.
She never has remarried.
Right. She did not want that, especially when it got as bad as it did. And the only thing she could do was panic and do something wild to get her way out of it. Yeah. But I do also believe that she was in circumstances that she didn't really have any other choice.
Well, and I think about it, she was raised this way. So, I mean...
But look at what she had to do. I mean, she had to help take care of not only her, disabled sister, but foster kids, again, that came in and took away from her attention that she probably needed from her mom and dad, that had an influence on her even after she was married and had kids. Nothing she did, I feel, helped her express who she wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I think that caught up to her.
I think Mary wanted to be an educator.
Yeah.
I think that Mary wanted to work with disabled children and do what she was good at.
Oh, I
That
agree
was her
completely,
calling.
but she never had the time it took for her to find herself.
Well, and to fall in the shadow of her husband. Here he was, this outstanding character.
That comes from a very prolific family, not only just as who they are, but in the faith that they were in.
Right.
You
you dated somebody that was in Church of Christ before.
A couple, but
And how did that go for you? Let's talk
it
about
wasn't good, and I'm not going to go there. It's in the past.
You weren't welcome, though.
No, I never felt welcome.
So do you think
And even like when I went to the church a couple of times with some of the people that I always had a very fond feeling for.
Yeah.
Some older people of that church that were really good to me, that were educators in our school system.
Right.
And yet when I got to the church, they were different people. They were different. If you're coming back, you need to join this church. And I don't, listen, I got exposed to it as a child even. And even as a child, sitting in the back pew, I did not feel welcome. because
Yeah.
I was not a member of the church or born into a member of the church. And we would go to their Bible school in the summer, and we always felt like the outsiders, my sister and I. And so, I didn't have great experiences. I'm not saying they're awful people.
No.
That's their way.
That's their way.
And it's so I accept everybody for their way, right? That's what they were born, raised in, indoctrinated by. That's fine. But yeah, they were
yourself.
the most forceful about you're not like us and you need to be like us.
And
so,
if you don't get that
and
way.
if you don't, you're going to hell.
Yeah, so we won't see you in the afterlife because we're going to be in heaven.
Yeah, we're going to be in heaven. You'll be down there
You'll
sweating.
be up there soaking up the good times while you're.
So, and I mean, like, I know Mary grew up in this faith, and I know she grew up in a family that was, accustomed to this faith. And I'm not saying, that just because she was born in this faith, she had to follow the path that was laid before her through faith. And in fact, in my experiences with people from the Church of Christ, especially girls that I dated younger, there were a lot of royal oats needing sown back in that day.
Well, I have dated someone that was in the Church of Christ, but let me just say that they're not, that they don't believe in divorce, I don't believe.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I mean, I think most churches feel that way, but
Yeah.
I think that they have to, like, pay their way out of divorces and things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
Well, I mean, they definitely have to gain the acceptance of the entire congregation for their actions and ask for forgiveness for their actions.
But do they all do that? Do they all do that? Because I highly doubt that some
yeah.
of did this.
But when they go into that church, they do what they're supposed to do. There's no doubt about that. Now, when they leave that church, it could be a little bit different attitude.
So I was looking a little bit into Freed Hardman, like their policies, and
It's a very conservative school.
right. I mean, like they can't wear shorts unless they're participating in sports, So if they're practicing or if there's a game or something that day on campus, and they cannot. Well, I mean, a lot of dorms are separated males and females, but they could not commingle with the males and the females in each other's dorms, but except for on one day of the year, and that was Halloween. So they go trick-or-treating.
What?
Yeah, they go trick-or-treating at the dorm. They commingle dorms on just one day of the year, and that's Halloween.
Well, I'd never
the
heard
day of the
that.
devil.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's odd.
Look, it's at the end of the day, it comes down to this. The way I was raised and the way I've learned over my years is to always be accepting of everybody.
Absolutely.
Regardless. Mm-hmm. And more of these people made me feel outside than anybody else, really.
But isn't that the way we both felt? Our dog is having a seizure. Not
No,
really.
he's
Not
dreaming.
really.
He's dreaming. He's barking at somebody in his dream.
Yeah.
Probably me. But, as far as this case goes, I think there's a lot of blurred lines here. I think there was a lot of stuff in Mary's life that she felt trapped by. Mm-hmm. And not that she wanted to be a wild child and just bust loose, but the urge was strong enough that she wanted to get out from under whatever it was that she was in.
Well, it said that she was out on bond. Did I say this already? That she was out on bond, and before her trial, and she goes to a bar on New Year's Eve one night, and this guy spots her, and she's smoking a cigarette and drinking a beer, and he says, "Aren't you the preacher killer?" And she looks at him and she starts laughing. She says, "You want to be next, motherfucker?"
So in 2010, a little-known Southern alt-rock band, the Drive-By Truckers, produced a song called "The Wig He Made Her Wear." And
I've never heard this.
yeah, and it describes the case in details and surrounds the actions of the Winklers, and specifically that of Mary. And it was just after the trial, that Mary was and really everybody was attacked by these men's rights activists. And I can't say that I don't totally understand where they come from, because their whole impetus was that men are always seen as the abusers and the victimizers, and it was just simply that she was let off because he was victimizing her. And so I don't know. That's just.
And you think about it, okay, so if Mary would have pulled some shit, or which she did not. I mean, she was very conservative. I mean, she was not, she didn't pull anything. Till this check thing, Mary was quiet.
See, that's why I think somebody influenced her to do that too.
And that's exactly what her attorneys claimed.
So I'll say this. In 2011, a film was made called The Pastor's Wife, in which Rose McGowan played Mary Winkler.
Yeah.
And as late as April of 2020, this case was part of an episode called The Pastor's Secrets in a show on HLN called Sex and Murder. It's a series.
Yeah.
And so it was featured in 2020.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, so I mean, like, there's been a lot of coverage on this. Also, so during the time that after Matthew died and while Mary was in jail and waiting trial, the Winklers had custody. Dan and Diane had custody of the girls.
Yeah.
And so I think it was Faris that might have came up with what happened to some money that was put into a trust fund for Matthew and Mary's daughters. And it was called the Huntington Fund. This is what it was called. And there was, they don't know how much money was put in there, but there was like another account that was mimicking this and taking money, and it was called the Dan and Diane Winkler Fund.
Oh.
And they don't know how much money was put into this trust fund originally, but they do know that $216 of it was gone. And
$216 or $216,000?
$216,000
Yeah.
was gone, and there was only $11,000 left over.
Yeah.
So they were sued. The Winklers were sued for this money, and they were ordered by the judge to pay back $175,000 to this trust fund for the girls, which is, that makes me wonder a little bit about Matthew. You're raised in this family, and what are they teaching? I'm not saying they're bad people, but that money and having these weird accounts and playing with people's money and things like that, did Matthew learn that and teach Mary that?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if they're okay with doing that sort of thing in this case, that maybe that was how Matthew was wired. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's why I think that's another reason that in this check kiting scam that was going on with Mary Winkler, I think he put her up to a lot of it and said, you're going to do it in your name. Because as the preacher of the church or pastor, I can't be caught. And if something does happen, you're going to have to take the fall for it.
I mean, it could be. It absolutely could be.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see how she could have any say in that. I mean, if he was the man of the house.
Right.
And according to their beliefs, that's, they make the decisions financially, which, we know how that goes and every family's different.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
there's that.
Yeah. Well, I can say, this is a testament to part of what we grew up around and what we understood. And,
Yeah.
I'd have my beliefs and my opinions in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing anybody says is going to change that.
That's right.
And
Same.
it's the same thing with anybody else that's a part of the Church of Christ or the Presbyterians or the Methodist or the Baptist or whoever.
Mm-hmm.
If you are indoctrinated in that way, you're going to have your feelings, your beliefs, and
Absolutely.
and that's okay.
That's okay.
Right?
Absolutely it is.
But at the end of the day, I'm going to step back and honor whatever your feelings and beliefs are, because that's how I was raised.
Yes.
Is to be accepting.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
only in the case where somebody is, blatantly out of line.
Right.
Don't hurt my people.
Mm-hmm.
Don't attack people, and you won't suffer the wrath.
Do you think that Matthew was abusive?
I do.
Do you think that he did this to the babies? You think he went and covered their mouths that morning and that pushed Mary right over the edge?
I do. I think, you know, him looking at her as you're the mother, the woman, you are the one that's going to get up and take care of these babies when they're screaming and crying, when they need food, when they need diapers, whatever. And I think he was, you know, more or less exiling himself to the fact that that was her role. And if he had to participate in it, he needed to end it quickly to keep it from aggravating him or disturbing him. You know, so yeah, I do. I believe he would have done something like that. You know, it also when he and Mary ran into his dad at the
Freed
school
Hardeman.
at Freed Hardeman. You know, I got to say this about a lot of guys. Most men have an innate desire to gain the acceptance and pride of their father and do things that help secure that. And some just never can. Doesn't matter what they say or do, it's not ever going to happen. And that's just where enough time passes where you have to accept that you have to live your life and your father has to live his life, and that's just the way it is. And I think when they met his dad at Freed Hardeman, that he was proud to say to him that things are getting better, when the truth is they probably were not. And that conversation ended in his death and, you know, the financial misgivings of Mary and essentially both of them. I mean, that's your wife. You are responsible for that, just like she's responsible for you as a partner. But they don't see it that way.
Right.
They don't. And the point I'm trying to make is he did everything he could to earn the pride and acceptance of his father and grandfather, and they come from a very long line of very well-respected people within this religion and in this way of life. And it wasn't really going that way for him.
Yeah.
So the only thing he knew to do was to still try to prop that up and gain that acceptance, and it just didn't happen, I don't feel.
Right. And I wonder now if Mary is involved in the Church of Christ still.
I would doubt it. You know, and adding to that, if his parents were the stand-up and kind of people that they teach each other to be, they would have never taken a dime of those kids' money. And that's exactly what they did. And that's exactly why a judge ordered them to pay money back to that trust fund.
Right. I think that, now I have read that Mary does not speak to her father that much anymore, or her siblings, or her foster siblings. So, yeah, I mean, maybe she just had it.
So that knowing that is the back end of the reason that I believe Mary just wanted out. She wanted away from something
All
that
of
she
it.
didn't like and something that was not part of any pleasure for her.
Yeah, she claims she asked for a divorce during the marriage, and Matthew just,
He wouldn't do it.
hell no. No, this is during the time when he was building his way up to be a minister, and, you know, no way.
Yeah.
Not because his career, not,
Well, I mean, look at what kind of stumbling block that would have been for him. Should something like that happen when he's a youth pastor or something.
and I don't know if in that church they have to be married to be a minister. I don't know. I think so. I think it's pretty much kind of a thing, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I danced around it. You know, sometimes because I was forced to, and sometimes because I chose to. But I don't really know enough to say that that's true or that's one of the rules.
Well,
So, Mary Winkler and Matthew Winkler.
that's it.
Be interesting to know what she's up to today.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to talk to Mary myself, but, you know.
All right. Well, interesting story nonetheless. And I want to remind everybody, subscribe. We need you to subscribe. We love what we do, and we love the fact that you are out there watching. Encourage your friends and families to subscribe to Walking Between Shadows. And when you do, don't forget to hit that like and set your notifications for when we publish new episodes. I also want to say that, you know, Taryn and I have our beliefs, and the way we feel life should be lived, and that's the beauty of being in our country and with our friends and family the way we are. And anybody that hears anything that we say that might be incorrect to fact,
Yes.
please don't hesitate to put a comment. Be nice, because if you're rude, you're just going to get blocked.
Yeah, you're
But-
just gonna it's just gonna be removed. I
Yeah.
mean, like, I'm not putting up with a bunch of shit.
Well, and we're human, we don't get everything right always.
no,
And it's
absolutely
okay to correct. We're not going to get offended by that, but
Right.
we do get offended when people say very ugly, mean things. But
Yeah.
I hope some people out there like our microphone placement this week. So, again,
Yeah.
thank you for watching Walking Between Shadows, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and set your notifications to learn when we get new episodes published. I've been your host, Ben Elliott, along with my beautiful wife, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye.
Thank you for watching this episode of Walking Between Shadows. Again, I'm your host, Ben Elliott, and my wife.
Taryn Elliott.
Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and look for new episodes coming soon.